Decolonizing Canadian Curriculum Starting at the Root, Educating Teachers, a research project by Prairie. For this research project, I wanted to delve into decolonization and the curriculum. Through my researching process on this topic, I found that the content I was most drawn to was about educating teachers on reconciliation, cultural responsiveness, and of course, decolonization. Once I noticed this pattern, I developed my research question, which goes as stated. How can providing meaningful treaty education to teachers help facilitate decolonization of curriculum in K-12 classrooms? From this, I was able to get more specific within my research. I chose this topic because decolonization is incredibly important to me and is a necessary piece in Canadian curriculum/education. I grew up doing Indigenous studies in my community schools for the entirety of my K-12 education. It was not until I was in high school that I realized many of my friends from other schools had never even taken one Indigenous studies class or learned about Canada's history with Indigenous peoples in other classes of theirs. This tells me that the curriculum is not being indigenized by teachers enough. Since I started university, I have heard many of my pre-service peers express that they fear teaching about Indigenous topics because they feel as though they do not have the knowledge themselves to teach it. So this tells me that there are so many teachers who want/need to indigenize their teachings, but do not feel as though they have enough appropriate resources to do so confidently. This is a major problem that needs to be addressed, and is why I wanted to focus on how we can begin to educate teachers on decolonization so that we can all grow and learn to confidently indigenize the curriculum that is being taught in classrooms. I know that learning about decolonization is going to be a lifelong practice and a most valuable one in all contexts of my life. This is the question I developed for this research project. How can providing meaningful treaty education to teachers help facilitate decolonization of curriculum in K-12 classrooms? As I researched, I learned some of the main reasons to why so many teachers have not indigenized the curriculum in their classrooms, and therefore are not working on decolonization as educators. The first reason was the fear of doing it wrong. Teachers often say they are reluctant to teach about Indigenous perspectives because they are afraid that they will do it wrong, and I quote. Another reason is having minimal knowledge on the topic. Most non-Indigenous settler teachers have very limited knowledge of the history of Indigenous-non-Indigenous relations, treaty and traditional rights, Indigenous knowledge, and current issues impacting Indigenous communities. And this is a huge issue, seeing as learning about Indigenous knowledge, treaties, colonization, and so much more is a part of the curriculum that needs to be taught by teachers. Another implication is the curriculum. One of the reasons the path to reconciliation in education is being obstructed is because of the reoccurring colonial approaches to enacting Indigenous education policies. Or in other words, the curriculum itself is in a very Eurocentric format, which has caused continued barriers. And last but certainly not least, healing. Healing is an important aspect of Indigenous-based education. Many elders have said that Indigenous people can only heal by going back to their traditional teachings. So how does this relate to my inquiry question? Once again, these are the four main reasons I sourced that inform why there is an overall lack of indigenization of curriculum in so many Canadian teachers' classrooms. This is important because this information is what confirms to me that in order for active decolonization of the curriculum to be happening, teachers need to be provided with ample treaty education themselves. And this takes me to the main aspect of my question, which is how can providing meaningful treaty educations to teachers help facilitate decolonization of curriculum in K-12 classrooms? I am now going to share with you my three main learnings. My first learning is the impact of developing relationships. Providing opportunities for settler teachers to develop meaningful relationships with Indigenous peoples is a crucial aspect of decolonization in the classroom. The process of coming to know the stories of Indigenous peoples prompted settler teacher candidates to shift horizons in a way that simultaneously decolonized their perceptions and allowed them to believe that better relationality between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians is possible and achievable in their own classrooms. Settler teacher educators agree and argue for the imperative of shifting settler teachers towards a pedagogy of reconciliation and put forward an approach of immersing settler teacher candidates in Indigenous contexts of education where relationships are directly experienced with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students who self-represent and determine the Indigenous knowledge of the curriculum. My second learning is looking at Indigenous knowledge systems. Although treaty education is in most Canadian curriculum, it is presented in Eurocentric ways. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission is calling for centering Indigenous worldviews in school curricula and pedagogies, and ensuring that Indigenous communities are also centered in this task. It is a counter-hegemonic decolonization of education. It is not a call for replacement, but for a movement towards a new balance and a new coexistence. It is essential to place Indigenous knowledge systems, oral histories, laws, protocols, and connections to the land into the center of the reconciliation process. The way forward with regard to formal education is to provide an indigenizing of academics or school systems. My third learning is understanding colonization. Teachers need to be taught about colonization in order to understand and work on decolonizing the curriculum they teach in their classrooms. As Janet Santos explains in her article, by learning about my own ancestors and by studying Indigenous education policies from the time of Canada's inception, I was able to make sense of how contemporary colonial society has been shaped by historical patterns. I developed a concise overview of my own understanding of colonization in Canada to share in a workshop for educators that would enable them to recognize themselves as beneficiaries of a system that steals from, disposes, and devastates Indigenous communities. Without an awareness of these truths, it is impossible to break one's complacity with them. Unless teachers are prepared to talk about land distribution and colonization in Canada with an understanding of how Canadian attitudes and behaviors perpetuate colonialism, they will merely be engaging in recolonization. This research is very important to me because decolonizing the Canadian curriculum is a must. And unfortunately, in my experience and the experience of many others, it is often looked past or brushed over in many classrooms. So, this research is valuable to me in both my personal life and my life as a future educator because it has helped me get better at understanding why so many teachers are not actively indigenizing their curriculum. It is a matter of them fearing they are doing it wrong, feeling they have minimal knowledge on the topic, the curriculum being Eurocentric, and not knowing how to work on the healing. This is why I asked the question of, how can providing meaningful treaty education to teachers help facilitate decolonization of curriculum in K-12 classrooms? Teachers themselves need to be taught how to approach decolonization of the curriculum. Through further research on how this can be done, I gathered my three main learnings. The first was the importance of settler teachers developing meaningful relationships with Indigenous peoples in their community, whether it be an elder or a student in the school, etc. The second was providing opportunity for teachers to learn about Indigenous knowledge systems so they can implement Indigenous ways of teaching in their classrooms/lessons. And thirdly was educating teachers on colonization, because the fact of the matter is, teachers cannot teach about colonization if they do not know the history and the impacts of it today. From this research, I feel as though I myself have a better understanding of the steps I can take, as well as offer to my colleagues to decolonize the curriculum in not only my classroom, but other classrooms. because as we have just explored, it is absolutely necessary. And here is my reference list of academic resources I used to make this research project happen. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for listening and learning with me. I really enjoyed doing the research for this project, and I can't wait to continue working on how I will decolonize curriculum in my very own classroom. I hope you learned something new, and yeah, thanks so much.